Employee safety is being redefined. We write volumes of standard operating procedures about it. We measure it, regulate it, and insure against its risks. In the US alone, organizations funnel billions into creating workplaces and environments in which employees are safe to bring their best talents. But physical safety and added creature comfort perks like stocked snack bars, open air offices, and foosball tables only do so much. They don't adequately address an employee's state of mind. They all but ignore employees' psychological safety. Today, my guest, Timothy Clark, and I discuss topics such as the 4 stages of psychological safety. Why our employees need to feel accepted before they'll feel safe to contribute and be heard. How any worker can learn regardless of aptitude given the right environment. 4 words every leader needs to live by. No cover, no candor, amongst many other topics. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Moving Forward Leadership Podcast, episode 128, The Importance of Psychological Safety, with Timothy Clark.
Welcome to this episode of Moving Forward Leadership. Stick around and learn how to achieve, excel, and become a leader that people willingly follow. Lead, don't boss. And now, here's the host of our show, Chief Leadership Officer, Scott McCarthy.
Welcome one, welcome all. It is your Chief Leadership Officer, Scott McCarthy. It's so great to have you here today. And if this is your first time tuning into the Moving Forward Leadership Podcast, this is where we talk about the 3 domains of leadership, and that is leading yourself, leading your people, and leading your organization. Why? So that you can achieve what you want to achieve, so that you can establish that high-performing team, and so that you can increase your organization's output, whatever that is. And here at the Moving Forward Leadership Podcast, I go out and grab world-class guests like Tim Clark and couple them with my 20 years of military experience to bring you shows like this one, Psychological Safety and the 4 stages of it. It is a fantastic interview today, folks. There are so many aha moments in this interview and in the book that I read that Tim graciously gave me. I went, wow. Some things that you know, but you just don't know why you know them or why it's important. Well, today it's going to come clear to you. So let's talk about Tim, shall we? Tim is the founder and CEO of LeaderFactor, leadership consulting and training organization that works with executive teams around the world. He's an Oxford-trained social scientist and sought-after international authority on organizational change. He's the author of 5 books on leadership, and this one is his newest release, The 4 Stages of Psychological Safety. We go into deep conversation about things that are going to make your people feel safe so that in the end, they can help bring organizational change that will push you and your organization further, faster, and in the right direction. So many great things in here. And I'm at the point now where, you know what? It's time for me to shut up, right? Get to the goods. So why don't you sit back, relax, and enjoy my conversation all around the importance of psychological safety with Tim Clark. Tim, welcome to the Moving Forward Leadership Podcast. It's so great to have you here, finally.
Thanks, Scott. Good to be with you.
So we're talking about your 5th book. 5th.
Yeah.
That's a lot. I'm on 0. So congratulations to you. And that's no small feat. But before we dive into the nuts and bolts of the book, I always like to know what the inspiration of the book. What got you up one day and said, hey, I'm going to write a book, and I'm going to write about it, the importance of psychological safety within the workplace. So why don't we start there?
Right. I think the deep why, Scott, is that, I've been working in the area of organizational culture for 25 years, But I think the reason that I did a deep dive into psychological safety is because psychological safety is the heart of culture. And whenever we find a team or an organization that's not performing well, if the strategy is good, if they have resources, if they have smart people, so if they have all of the other things that you would normally need to be successful and they're still not successful, we always end up pointing our finger at culture. Culture is the biggest obstacle that we have, especially with innovation. But culture is still broad, right? If we think about culture, it's still broad. And so that doesn't really, it's not really helpful if you just say, well, your culture is getting in the way. Your culture is an obstacle. What is it about culture that's getting in the way? And if you break that down, it takes you every time, it takes you to psychological safety. Psychological safety is really that formidable barrier that it prevents teams and organizations from being inclusive, from executing well, and certainly from innovating well. And so what I found is that there's more depth to this concept, and that leaders need to understand that they can do everything right, but if they don't create and nurture and sustain psychological safety, the team's not going to gel, and they're not going to be able to perform the way that they could perform. It's one of those things that you can't say, well, I'm doing all these other things right, but I'm not doing psychological safety right. If you don't do that right, then your team is not going to perform well. So it's this indispensable element. And I kept running back into it with our client organizations. And the research now has caught up with our intuition to help us understand that psychological safety is absolutely essential for performance. So that's why. That's why I got into it. And it's going to become even more important as we get into this new decade, right? So I'll just make a comment about millennials. So millennials are pouring into the workforce, and they have different expectations. They have higher expectations about culture in particular. And what they're saying by and large is that they assume that psychological safety will be there as a term of employment, really. And if it's not there, a lot of them are calling time out and saying, hang on a second, I didn't sign up for this. I came to learn and grow and contribute. And if I can't do that, then I have to go. And with a lot of the technology companies that we're working with, this is happening over and over again. If you don't have psychological safety, you will bleed out your top talent. So that's why we're here. That's why I tackled this topic, Scott. It's that important.
No, it makes it. I completely agree with you. It makes complete sense. And just a couple of added bits. You say it's going to be so important for the next decade, and it's true. With all the different movements that have popped up now, we're currently recording in the middle of June, and Black Lives Matter is really hot right now. If we talked about a year ago or so, it was the Me Too movement, and so on and so forth. So that whole psychological safety aspect is definitely important. And if you go even further with the global pandemic that we're in the middle of right now, people are going to need to feel secure and safe within the organization, and you have to get the people together. You have to get them all on the same page, and you have to have your people feel that they can speak up, that they can. Yes. Right, they have the ability to speak up, not be judged or criticized for speaking up and voicing whatever concerns they have. So as I've gone through the book, I kind of really felt like, I was like, wow, this is kind of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but done in an overlay of leadership and organizational theory and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So your title of the book is The Four Stages, and within there, the four sections of the book refers to the four stages. So for the listener there, what are these four stages, and can you give a brief overview of them so that they have an understanding of what they are?
Right. Let's go through those. So the first stage of psychological safety is what we call inclusion safety. This is the foundation. Inclusion safety means that you feel included, accepted, that you belong, that you're part of the team. And as you said, Scott, this follows the four stages, follows the pattern of basic human needs. So if you watch any person, and even watch yourself as you go in, if you go into a new social unit or team or organization, what's the first thing you're worried about? You're worried about whether you fit in. So that's why we begin here with inclusion safety. Now, inclusion safety is also, as you just said, Scott, it's very much related to the social movements that we have going on in our societies today. Inclusion safety, as I say in the book, is actually a human right. It's not something that you earn, it's something that you're owed. And the reason that that is true is because for human beings, if you're human and you're harmless, then we really have a moral obligation to invite you into our society. There's no way we can justify excluding you. So the principle that I talk about in the book is that worth precedes worthiness. And what that means is that your inherent worth as a human being, we have to acknowledge that as the first point. We'll get to discussions about worthiness and performance later. But the first position is that you have inherent worth, therefore, I'm obligated to invite you into my society. So this is what inclusion safety is all about. Now think about how difficult it is to do this. Think about how organizations and human beings as a species have struggled with this, right?
100%.
What we've done, Scott, in many organizations since the Industrial Revolution, we've normalized a lot of very unacceptable behavior. In many organizations that we've worked with, the organizations have normalized harassment. They've normalized bullying. They've normalized public shaming behavior. And these are all things where people got used to it because the leaders set the norms for these patterns of behavior. And over time, people accepted that. And then those norms were perpetuated by other leaders, and it kept on going. This happens in many organizations. And so, for example, you look at the eruption of moral outrage that has recently surrounded the death of George Floyd. Well, this goes back to the same issue of inclusion safety. So, right, race relations are just one aspect of the difficulty, the fault lines that we have, the differences that we have, and yet we cannot justify not being inclusive. And so what we do as humans is we govern ourselves based on what I call in the book junk theories of superiority, right? So I'm a better race than you. I'm a better gender than you. I've got more money than you. I'm better educated than you. I've got better friends than you. It goes on and on and on. But these are all illegitimate junk theories of superiority. And people cling to these because they want to be important, they want to matter. And what we end up doing so often is trying to elevate ourselves by subordinating others. Well, unfortunately, that's not the way to do it. It never solves the problem. It never works. And all of those theories are patently false. So that's just stage one. So stage one says that we have a moral obligation to be inclusive, and that's our foundation. Then we go to stage two. Stage two is what we call learner safety.
Before we dive into stage two, if I can just jump back, I love the aspect of you talking about if you don't have inclusion safety. Actually, I'm going to make 2 points about this. But the first one being, if you don't have it and you're not being inclusive, I'm better than you because of X. I'm better than you because of Y. Leaders pushing people down to bring themselves up. And that's one of the things I basically preach against here in moving forward leadership. Leadership is not pushing people down, but rather building them up to in turn help you achieve whatever it is you need to achieve, because that's how it goes. You have a team. You have a team of people that you employ in some kind of manner, and they go out and achieve things on your behalf. So it's absolutely crucial for leaders to, empower the people, bring them up. And just because you have more education, for example, for myself, I'm going to receive my second master's soon. It's a fair bit of education. That's a lot of time in school, but it doesn't mean I have the best answers. Doesn't mean squat, right? As a leader. Right. So leaders need to get past themselves, drop those egos, and listen to their people, empower their people to bring this stuff to the forefront.
Right.
And the second,
go ahead.
And the second thing I want to say was right at the beginning, you talked about how, especially millennials, if they don't feel inclusion safe, they basically bounce right away. And it goes right back to the beginning when what you said in your opening was that a lot of organizations lose their top people. Well, it's because the top people don't feel included within the organization for one reason or another. If they felt included, they wouldn't be bouncing out. They would be staying because they felt at home. They felt like it was a family. They felt, safe there, whatever safe means to them. So I really enjoyed this part of the book.
Let me add to what you're saying, Scott. I agree with you. So one of the junk theories of superiority in organizations, and this is probably extremely relevant for your listeners, is that if you possess title, position, and authority, right, that's a justification for your superiority. Well, title, position, and authority, anything associated with rank, those are simply artifacts that the organization gives you to do your job. And in large, complex organizations, we need hierarchy. We need a division of labor. We need roles and responsibilities. So those are things that we need. But in no way makes you superior or more important than anyone else. And so what we do with psychological safety is that allows us to create a culturally flat organization. How many times have I seen managers walk in the room and ice the team, ice them into silence, right? They have a chilling effect because they're pushing the fear button. Well, that's a complete abdication of leadership. One of the first things that I say in the book is if we go watch a team, interact with a team, if there's a prevalence of fear on a team, that's the first sign of weak leadership. That means that team is not being led well. We know that because the leader is using fear as a replacement for leadership, which is a cop-out. So if you ever see a leader that's hiding behind title, position, and authority, they don't understand what they do for a living. They don't understand the essence of leadership. The best synonym for leadership in the English language is influence. And of course, we mean positive influence, right? Productive, positive influence. So we want to create a culture in which people are agnostic to your title, your position, and your authority, where we can debate issues on their merits and we don't really care where you are in the hierarchy, or for that matter, even if you're an independent contractor or perhaps you're a freelancer, because we're now getting configurations of teams where we have people with all different kinds of employment status as well. So really that shouldn't even matter either. Yeah. Or if you're remote or physically co-located, these are the configurations that we're going to see more and more as we get into this decade. So we have to neutralize the influence, the power, and the impact of title, position, and authority so that we can really solve problems and collaborate together.
Ultimately, it boils down to everybody's a human being. Treat everybody with respect, right?
That's it.
Awesome. All right, let's move on to, I believe it's learner safety.
Learner safety, stage 2. Learner safety means that you can engage in the learning process, the discovery process, which means what? Asking questions, giving and receiving feedback, experimenting, making mistakes without fear that you'll be punished or marginalized or embarrassed in some way. Now, you'll notice that learning requires a little bit more personal vulnerability, right? You're exposing yourself as you learn. There's some risk associated with learning. And so you need to feel the safety to do that. So the social exchange in stage 2 is that, so if Scott, if you're my boss, then what I would hope that I'd get from you is encouragement to learn in exchange for engagement in the learning process. So that's what happens in stage 2. And we all bring some level of inhibition and fear to the learning process. So, for example, in the book, I give a case study that's fascinating. So in the United States, for example, every 26 seconds, a student drops out of high school. Now, that's a tragedy. If we dig into that to understand what's going on, we realize that in most cases, these are students that have the ability to do the academic work. Very few of them have legitimate learning disabilities that would not allow them to do the work. So why are they dropping out? They're dropping out because they are emotionally bruised. They have lost confidence. They don't have support, and they call it quits. Here's what we know about learning. Learning is a process that is both intellectual and emotional. Those two tracks are interwoven. You can't separate the two. You can't be a purely rational processing unit. That's not what humans are. Humans learn. When they learn, it's intellectual and emotional, and there has to be support for that. Well, adults are no different than high school kids. They're learning. They're vulnerable. When they learn, there's an intellectual track and an emotional track, and they need support in that process. If they are harshly corrected, if they are mocked in that process, they will shut down. And what happens is, and we've all experienced this, right? If someone pushes the fear button as you're trying to learn, then you will, what that does is it triggers what we call the self-censoring instinct. And when that self-censoring instinct is activated, we retreat, we withdraw into a mode of personal self-risk management. We have to. That's a very natural thing to do because we're adaptable creatures. So that's stage 2, Scott, learner safety. That is the next level after inclusion safety.
I think probably the most important part about that is the ability and permission, authority for people to go out and try something and fail. How many times do we hear of people going and trying something, failing at it, only to be reprimanded, disciplined, weak performance, whatever. But they're like, no, I'm trying something new. Let's try something new. Let's find a way to be different. Didn't work out. Okay, but we learned something from that. But instead, their supervisor goes the opposite direction of embracing it to completely not condoning it, the opposite, being against it. And then what happens is the employees get gun shy. They're like, well, last time I tried something new, it failed. I got reprimanded. It's like, heck no, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to follow along and do exactly what I'm being told to do and not really put my hand up and bring up new ideas or anything. So can you talk a little bit more importance of enabling failure and how leaders can support people, working through a failure? Because sometimes the employee themselves get bummed out, right? They're like, oh crap, this didn't work out. I failed at it. I suck. But no, as long as you learn something from it, it's all good.
Yeah. Yeah. In the book, I give a case study about a high school calculus teacher, and he's got to be one of the best in the world. And I spent time in his classroom. I spent time interviewing him. I spent time interviewing his students. And what he does, Scott, and you may remember this, he is able to create learner safety in his classroom. And what this does is it separates fear from mistakes and failure. He separates those two. He disconnects those two. So when the students make mistakes, when they fail, say they fail on a test or an assignment and they make mistakes, there's no fear that comes with that. Because if you think about it, there's no necessary relationship between fear and failure. They don't necessarily go together. And so what he's done is he's pulled those apart. So the students, in fact, he said to me, he said, Tim, he said, failure isn't the exception. It's the expectation. I expect the students to fail. That's the learning process. So we're going to go through a series of failures together, and we're going to love doing it. And it's going to be an adventure, and it's going to be exciting. That's how he is able to characterize failure and have the students interpret failure in his classroom. They know they're going to fail, and when they fail, it doesn't bother them because they realize it's a step forward. That's how they learn. It's experimental and experiential. But as you said, Scott, in many organizations with adults, we don't do that very well. There's automatically fear associated with failure and mistakes. And so what does it do? It shuts people down. So think about the tax that we impose on our organizations when people feel a deep sense of fear associated with failure. We're not able to engage them at the levels that are possible because they're shut down, right? So you can see the importance of learner safety in an organization of any kind.
Yeah, no, it's so true. And then it goes back to, I always felt like as I went through the whole book, it felt like, okay, if you don't have one, you snowball back down, right? So if someone doesn't have learner safety, i.e. they try something, they fail at it, they get reprimanded, and ultimately then that challenges the inclusion safety because they go turn, well, am I actually, am I being included here? Am I right?
That's right.
Do I actually belong? Blah, blah, blah. And then it's like, no, okay, I'm out. I found somewhere else where they actually embrace what I'm trying to do. So it's definitely needed for leaders to understand that one can truly quickly snowball down from one to the next, and all the way.
That's right.
Out. All right, let's move on. Let's contributor safety. So exactly what do you mean by that? How can leaders ensure that they have their organization that enables this?
Right. So stage 3 is, as you say, contributor safety. Contributor safety means that you can take what you've learned, take the skills and the knowledge and the experience, and now you can go use it. You can go apply it. That's exactly what contributor safety is. It's the ability to contribute as a full member of the team without, again, the fear of retribution, without the fear of embarrassment, to make a difference, to participate in that value creating process, that process of solving problems, of coming up with solutions. And by the way, again, this is consistent with the pattern of basic human needs. So we want to be included first. We want to learn and grow. And then we want to apply. We want to use what we have learned. So that's what contributor safety is all about. It's about applying what we have learned. And most human beings have a very deep instinctual need to make a difference. They want to make a difference wherever they are. They want to be useful. They want to make a difference. They want to matter. They want to contribute. And so it naturally follows as the third stage.
Yeah, I love that last bit of, people want to make a difference, especially for leaders out there, especially the audience who's listening here, because they're hungry. They don't want to be those bosses. They don't want to be the boss that they had that they absolutely despised, right? They're like, wow, I'm a leader now. I have all the examples of how I don't want to be. And what we're
Right.
talking about now is how you should be, and enabling people for that, the learner safety, the contributor safety of enabling your people to come up and bring up those ideas and say, hey, this is what I learned, or this is what I believe we can do here. And much like as we discussed earlier, as the leader, you don't have all the answers. You shouldn't have all the answers. If you think you have all the answers, you're doing something wrong. And I actually
Right.
did a talk where I say leaders should be more focused on questions than answers. Enable your people to bring the answers forward, but you focus on the questions. How can we do this better? What is the next stage? Where do we need to go? How can this be more effective? How can we be more efficient? And let your people come forward with those answers. And this is that whole contributor piece, right?
It is, Scott. And what you're talking about is it's such a pattern that remains, it lingers in many organizations, and we really need to overcome it. It's really the imperial model of leadership, which is something that we've inherited from the Industrial Revolution. And even beyond that, it's this leader as oracle. I am the repository of all answers. Come to me. I will give you the answer and dispatch you. That is absolutely ridiculous in this decade and in this century, because we live and work in hyper competitive environments, unforgiving environments, incredibly fast paced markets. There's no one that has all the answers. That is a complete myth. And so, as you said, Scott, the leader becomes an enabler, a facilitator, a collaborator, a learning partner. This is the role of the leader. Now, the leader also provides the vision and guidance and encouragement, of course. But the notion that the leader has all the answers is absurd.
100%.
So that it's you're not going to get anywhere. Given the agility and the adaptability that organizations need to have today.
No,
that model is obsolete.
Yeah, it's long gone, and unfortunately, leaders or bosses or senior management have not necessarily adapted and shifted with that change quickly.
Right.
And hence we are today, right?
That's right. That's right.
Keeps us employed. So
that's right.
Maybe we shouldn't complain too much, but at the same time, it's tough to see. Sometimes you have goals, but you know what? You have a hard time reaching them, and you just can't figure out why. Why is it that you can't achieve those things that you want to achieve? Maybe it's dedication. Maybe it's motivation. Maybe you haven't picked the right goals. So this is where I was not too long ago. And then I realized something. I've been developing the Power Goals program my entire life. And here it is now for you, where you can learn how to pick the right goals, figure out how to achieve those goals, how to stay on track, but most importantly, how to get back on track when you get off. So are you ready? Are ready to up your game and achieve those things that you've been meaning to achieve for so long now? Simply go to movingforwardleadership.com/power and learn more about the Power Goals program and achieve everything that you've been wanting to achieve. And now, back to the show. All right, let's move on to the fourth one. The fourth one is challenger safety. And this one's super interesting. I really enjoyed the concept behind this because I fully agree with it. And it's kind of it kind of dovetails into what we were just talking about, in that leaders don't have all the answers.
Yeah.
But they need to have the ability to ask the questions. So let's go down challenger safety, shall we?
Let's do it. Challenger safety is the culmination. It's stage 4, the last stage, and it's the highest level of psychological safety. And what it means is that you can challenge the status quo without fear of, again, jeopardizing your personal standing and reputation. Now, think about what this means, though. So it's one thing to be included. It's another to feel safe to learn. It's another to feel safe to contribute. But what we're talking about here is feeling safe to challenge the way things are done. That is a tall order. That's another level, right? We're saying that the organization and the leadership will tolerate my dissent, my disagreement, my pushback. That's what this is all about. Now, why is this so important? Because this is where we innovate. Crossing over to challenger safety, that is the threshold to innovation. So think about innovation for a minute. Innovation, innovation by its very nature is disruptive of the status quo. It means that we are changing the way we do things. We're disrupting the way we do things, and we're going to figure out how to do them better. Well, how does that work unless people feel free and able to challenge the status quo? You can't really do that. So you can see how important challenger safety is. And yet this is an enormous challenge for leaders to be able to cultivate and sustain a culture with challenger safety, because they themselves, they have to have exceptional emotional intelligence. They have to have their ego needs completely regulated. They have to show some humility. They have to be collaborators. They have to be able to withstand challenge, right? So they have to nurture this environment where there's constructive dissent, where there's creative abrasion, where ideas are colliding and rubbing against each other. Because after all, that's the way that we solve problems. That's how we come up with solutions. That's how we innovate. But the hard question here is, Scott, do you as a leader, can you handle that? Can you accommodate that? Do you have the emotional and the moral capacity to nurture an environment where this is taking place? Where are you personally secure enough to deal with this, to have debates where we discuss issues on their merits and we don't really care about title or position or authority? We're trying to figure out the best way to do things. This will challenge leaders to the wall. It will take you, this will challenge you. This will test you as a leader as you have never been tested before. So you think you may be an effective leader? Let's see how well you can lead innovation. Let's see if you can really nurture challenger safety. In my mind, that's the ultimate test.
No, that's awesome. One thing that I really liked that you put was the constructive dissent. I really like that. Now, for a leader out there, there's a fine line between that and potentially, insubordination. I'll use as a term, being non-constructive, but being challenging for the sake of being challenging. So, for the leader out there, how can they determine the difference between the two? And the second part of that question is, how can they prepare their team to bring forward the constructive dissent, not necessarily just the dissent?
Yeah. The way that I would answer that question, Scott, is I would frame it in this way for your listeners. So everyone, I want you to think about your stewardship as a leader this way. You have two jobs that you have to do simultaneously on your team. You need to increase the intellectual friction of your team. And that's what, as Scott, you're saying, that's the constructive dissent. That's the creative abrasion. So we need intellectual friction to go to very high levels. But at the same time, we need social friction to go down. Here's what happens on teams. If the intellectual friction goes up and the social friction goes up at the same time, at some point, the social friction will shut down the intellectual friction, and we will not be having productive debate anymore. It's shut down. The social friction shut it down because people are not getting along anymore. So the world-class leader is able to push the intellectual friction up and at the same time push the social friction down. Now, how do you do that? You do that by modeling exceptional emotional intelligence. That means that you allow the challenge, you allow the dissent, you handle that emotionally, because your people are waiting to see how you respond to challenge and even bad news. That's the way that the way that you respond emotionally to dissent and bad news. Those are the most important signals that you give out to the team to say to the team, it's okay, or it's not okay to engage this way. So you've got to be able to tolerate that and handle that emotionally. You've got to model that. Number two, you've got to patrol the boundaries of respect. So whether you are challenging or being challenged, you have to make sure that people are respecting each other. As soon as the debate becomes personal, then we start to get off. We start to get off track, right? So as soon as we become personal, then the social friction rises, and you cannot allow that to happen. And so your job as the leader is to manage the collaboration, the quality of the collaboration, and you can't let it get personal. So that's why I say you patrol the boundaries of respect to ensure that people are respecting each other as the intellectual friction goes very, very high. That's the only way you can maintain that, because it gets to be very hard-hitting dialogue. And we've got ideas and opinions colliding, and human beings are sensitive. And it takes quite a skilled leader to keep that going in a productive way.
And it rolls right back to where we started this whole conversation of inclusion, right? Because if the people don't feel included in the ability to, bring these challenges forward, then everything just snowballs right back down the hill again. And in the book, you have a nice, upwards slope, nice angled upward slope graph that you use to go through it, which kind of portrays this very well. So I really like that, and enabling, people, the intellectual conflict up, but the social one down. So basically you have the ability to speak your mind and critically, but at the same time, understanding that people are listening to what you're saying, but not necessarily judging you as a person.
Yeah. So let's put this in perspective a little bit, Scott, because what we're saying is we need people to feel safe to speak their mind, to challenge. And yet it was last year that Gallup did a big poll across North America, and they found that only 1/3 of employees felt that they could speak their minds, and that their opinions were valued. Only 1/3. So you can see how much work we have to do to create challenger safety in organizations. We're not remotely there. And on most teams, there's a big opportunity to take a big step in that direction. But many leaders, they're not doing it well. They need help. They need skill development. They need development of emotional intelligence and poise and composure. They need to overcome their insecurities, which chronically get in the way, so that they can be they've got to be at peace with this process, right? With this constructive dissent. They've got to be able to handle that and say, you know what, this is how we work. And by the way, if you look at innovation by and large is a social process. It emerges from interaction, from human interaction. Now, once in a while, someone will have a light bulb moment of lone genius where they're by themselves. One person is alone and he or she comes up with some great insight, but that's the exception. Most innovation happens through a social process as we are working together. And we need leaders to understand that, and we need them to be able to facilitate this process more effectively.
I love that part that you mentioned, that the leader has to be at peace with their insecurities, right? And I often talk about how people need to drop their ego. They need to be open. They need to understand that, like we talked about, you don't have all the answers. You need to be asking the questions, and that ultimately enables, people. And I also like the aspect of, you have to keep your emotions in check. If someone comes to you with bad news, you can't shoot the messenger.
Mm-hmm.
They're not responsible. They're just
Yeah.
bringing you the information of what's happening. Do not necessarily take them personally accountable for something that maybe they had no control, because then, like as you kind of hinted at, people get gun shy. They start not trusting. They don't have the ability to show up with the news. And then all of a sudden people start hiding it. I've
Mm-hmm.
seen this happen in organizations where the boss, the person in charge, would just shoot the messenger, regardless if they were responsible. So
That's
then I started coming, playing roulette to see who was going to go with the news. And then people would just say, well, it's easier to try to fix it or hide it than it is to bring it forward. And that is not the type of culture that you want within an organization.
No, it's really not. It's really not.
Tim, man, this has been a fantastic interview, fantastic conversation. The book, I've absolutely loved it. Thank you for sending me a copy. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It's going to be one of the ones I hold on to for quite a long time. It's going to definitely stay in my bookcase now that it's I've gone through it. As we wind down this interview, I do got a couple last questions for you. And one is a question I ask all the guests here at Moving Forward Leadership. And that is, according to you, Tim Clark, what makes a great leader?
Well, I'll offer one parting thought on that, Scott, that may be helpful to your listeners, and that is, lead as if you have no power. If you frame your stewardship that way, I think it will help you understand the essence of what you are being asked to do. And the reason I say that is because as leaders, we are never neutral actors. We always have an influence. It's just a matter of what kind of influence. And ultimately, leaders either lead the way or get in the way. That's something that we all need to reflect on very, very deeply. Are you leading the way, or are you getting in the way? And the best way to lead the way is to lead as if you have no power. If you frame your stewardship that way, it will help you see more clearly what you're being asked to do. And it will accelerate, I think, your growth and development as a leader.
That's awesome. I gotta follow up with a little anecdotal story. So my background is, I'm Canadian Army. I'm Canadian military. I graduated from the Royal Military College of Canada here in Kingston, Ontario. And literally the day after graduation, I was returning my equipment, some stuff that stays at the college. And I remember being in line with it, and one of the senior non-commissioned officers there was giving his words of advice. And I'll never forget this. And he said, "Remember, you don't know squat." He used a different word than squat, and we'll keep the show clean. But essentially his point was much like that, is that you don't have all the answers. You have to go in with an open mind, and that you have to be willing to listen to your people and understand where they're coming from. So right. I absolutely love that answer. And I think it's the first time I've ever heard it put that way with, I got to count, but I think we're close to 70 odd guests now here at Moving Forward Leadership. So well said, sir. Final question is, where can people find you? How can they follow you? Feel free to give yourself a shameless plug. You got one of 5. We talked about one of 5 books. So why don't feel free to just, guide people.
Oh, sure. Well, we'd invite folks to join us on LinkedIn, Timothy R. Clark, Twitter, same. LeaderFactor.com is our website. And by the way, we do have the behavioral guide, which is a free download. It's a practical guide and companion to the book, and helps people with very practical, concrete behaviors for each stage. And that, by the way, we have people download that from all over the world. And then we also have the 4 stages team survey, which is a validated instrument that we use with organizations to help them get a baseline on where they are with psychological safety so that they can then take steps to improve. So those are some additional resources that you may be interested in.
Awesome. For the listeners, always, it is easy for you. Just go to the show notes for this podcast, and all the links are there. Tim, again, thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule to talk to me, most importantly, the listener out there.
Thanks, Scott. It's been a real pleasure.
All right, that's all I got for you fine folks today. I hope you enjoyed the show. I hope you enjoyed the interview. And most importantly, I hope you got something out of it. And if you did, remember R squared, S squared, right? Rate and review the show so that it gets a little bit noticed, a bit more. But most importantly, I can help more people, because that's what I'm here for. That's what my guests are here for, is to help more people become better leaders and not being bosses, right? So remember that. R squared, rate and review. S, share the show. Share this show with someone who you think can relate to the podcast as a whole and today's topic. And then finally, subscribe. Subscribe so that you never miss another episode. And you can do that via your podcast playing app of choice through movingforwardleadership.com/subscribe. That's it for today, ladies and gentlemen. And as always, stop bossing and start leading. Take care now.